Hello, my name's Will Edmonds. Welcome to Panther Sports Under the Claws. Today we're joined by two-time Super Bowl champion and the current head football coach here at Georgia State University, Bill Curry. Coach Curry, welcome to Panther Sports.
Thank you, Will. It's a real thrill to be here, and I'm impressed with your preparation.
Thank you. So tell me, what's it like being back in Atlanta, the city you were born and raised in, working again?
It's almost indescribable. It really is. And I say almost because I think I can do it. Think of the place that you love most, where you grew up. That's Atlanta, downtown Atlanta for me. Not just the broad interpretation of metropolitan, but right down here. My dad worked about 4 blocks that direction. I worked at a Tom McCann shoe store at 5 Points, which is only a couple of blocks from here. And there were so many pleasant memories that it's just fun to come down here and reminisce before I go to work and after. So it's a great joy to be back here, and it's a joy to work at Georgia State, which is an institution that's dear to our heart.
What many of our viewers won't know is that football was not your first love. You actually grew up loving baseball. And it wasn't until the 1958 NFL championship game between the Baltimore Colts and the New York Giants was the first time you sat down with your dad and you watched a football game in its entirety. What was it about that game that captured your heart?
First of all, it was being played in Yankee Stadium. And my intention as a high school junior, which is what I was at the time, was to pitch for the New York Yankees. And Yankee Stadium was like Mount Olympus to me. So I was interested in seeing what it was going to be like. Well, then the game had such drama, and it went back and forth, and there was such charisma on both sides of the ball, with Gifford on the one side and Unitas and Raymond Berry and all those, Gino Marchetti, who broke his leg during the game. All these things happened that just turned it into drama that you can't escape. And even though I was a football player, my heart wasn't in it until that day, and I think there was a sea change that day.
Well, if I can quote you, in your book you wrote, "I was one of the early, eager, utterly smitten converts to America's game, rising from the back row as surely as a repentant sinner in a Billy Graham crusade. With every head bowed and every eye closed, I quietly raised my hand, went forward, and fell to my knees in adoration of the new state religion of the United States of America, pro football." Do you still consider football closer to a religion than a sport?
Sadly, there are people who think that way. They should not. I should not. But certainly there have been times when we treat it as if it were a religion. And what is religion? For most people, religion means there's something that has an answer for everything. And there are actually people in this part of the country who treat football as if it were going to solve all their problems. If we can only win the national championship, everything will be wonderful. Well, maybe their team wins the national championship, everything's not wonderful. 2 years later, they fire the coach because he loses 2 games, or he loses a rivalry game. And it's an illogical, another thing about religion is that it's an illogical tribal system. Well, so is football in this part of the world. So I really did. I've been to revival meetings, and I was a convert, and I could have been metaphorically raising my hand and going forward.
Now, you've played under some of the greatest coaches of all time, Bobby Dodd, Vince Lombardi, Don Shula, to name but a few. I'm not going to ask you to compare those guys today, but can you see aspects in all of those coaches in the way that you coach yourself?
I don't think you can avoid it. I think you find yourself drawing on the best attributes of each one. And if I had to wrap it up quickly in a tidy package for Bobby Dodd, I would say it was his genius in understanding his student athletes. What was our advantage at Georgia? The perception of the Georgia Tech football player was that we were smarter than other people. Now, we were stupid enough to believe that, which meant we had an advantage. We thought we were smart. So when something happened in the game, whether or not we really were smarter, we usually took advantage and managed to find a way to win. So that's confidence. With Lombardi, his genius is much, much misunderstood. And I didn't get it. When I tried to play for him, I hated his guts because he wasn't Bobby Dodd. I never forgave him for not being Bobby Dodd until I walked in his hospital room and he was on his deathbed, and I saw that he was authentic. That was his true greatness. His other true greatness was the part that almost never nobody saw, which was he always knew when to back off. He never had us tired at game time. You would have thought he'd have been the most tyrannical worker, but he was not. He kept us on the field shorter than most of the other coaches. Not much known. Don Shula's great genius was that he could spot something in a human being. He decided whether or not he could believe in you. If he decided he believed in you, he would never give up on you. So when you got in a tough game, you would never give up on him. That was his genius. And he took guys like me off the junk heap, gave us starting positions, pushed us, made us teammates, and won championships. Won more games than any coach in the history of the NFL. And I think it was because of that loyalty factor.
And you can see these aspects in the way that you sort of think when you're sort of trying to put together practices and the way you want your own team to run.
I find myself actually referencing those guys. It's as if you were taking an English final and T.S. Eliot, The Wasteland, and you memorize the last 20 stanzas. That stuff comes back to you when you need it, and hopefully that works for coaches too.
Now, it's interesting what you said about Lombardi, because before Super Bowl III, you were quoted by the New York Times as saying that you didn't have a pleasant memory of any of your association with the Green Bay Packers, and the problem was simple: Vince Lombardi. You've since said you regret saying these things, and you said you went to Vince Lombardi's deathbed. When you see players like Terrell Owens talking bad about their teammates and coaches, and this happens, seems more frequently now, what goes through your mind?
Don't do that. You're a moron. That's what goes through my mind, just like Bill Curry was a moron for doing that. That's not, if you got something to say to another person, the right way to do it is to go to them, shut the door, and say it to them face to face. Not in a headline in the New York Times or the Dallas whatever or the AJC. That is not the way to be a real human being. And I was immature and I was wrong. And thank goodness in the case of Coach Lombardi, I was able to get to him and apologize. There were other situations where I was not quite so fortunate, and I wish I had done better. That's not a good thing to do. Trashing people to somebody else is the worst form of, it's the anti-team response mechanism, and it's the opposite of what the good stuff of football really teaches.
Now, going back a bit, before you had graduated high school, you'd already worked a multitude of jobs, including, as you said earlier, working in a shoe store and working a construction job. When you think about current college players today that have maybe never worked a job before, they're a bit pampered, they've had it easy, do you think these players could benefit from the sort of discipline and work ethic that you can only really learn in the workforce at a young age?
Well, first of all, a lot of the guys did have to work early. They weren't always star athletes. They're just a very few. The very highest level of talent is treated in a special manner from the time they're 12 years old. Most of the guys in my sport are not those great athletes. Those guys play basketball. I'm serious now. I mean, everybody in the world knew that Michael Jordan, by the time he was a senior in high school, was going to be something super special. That you can't say that about a lot of us, especially the linemen. So even in today's world, a lot of the guys do learn the values of the work ethic. For the ones who don't, they get in a college program, and when you're in a tough college program, like Georgia State football will be, you're going to get up at 6 in the morning, pump iron, eat breakfast, go to class, get out, go to tutoring, go to football meetings, go to football practice, run, work yourself into oblivion until about 5:30, 6 o'clock, come off the field, go back in the weight room, finish your workout, eat dinner, go to tutoring, go to the library, work till midnight, get up at 5 a.m. and do it again every single day, including the off season. So those guys know how to work.
I'd like to go back even further maybe and quote your father, if I may. He said, "One day, all athletes will be lifting weights. They laugh at us now, but every sport can be improved with strength, skill, and flexibility." Now, obviously, that sort of thinking is commonplace. In fact, you'd be crazy to think anything else now. But back then, that was revolutionary. That wasn't the norm. How would your dad feel seeing players like Rafael Nadal and Tiger Woods who have transformed their sport, through their physicality?
My father was laughed at when he said what you just quoted. And I rebelled. Would not be a weightlifter. I looked kind of like this. Now, I didn't look like this when I played in the NFL, because once I realized that I needed to pump iron, I did it. And I got him to help me learn how to do it. But I didn't take to his teaching until I had to. But he lived until October of 2007, and he just loved watching A-Rod and watching Tiger. And he stopped saying, he didn't even say, I'm going to watch the PGA, I'm going to watch the Masters this afternoon. He said, I'm going to watch Tiger this afternoon. And before Tiger was Gary Player, who lifted weights all the way back in the 50s and 60s and was a champion golfer. So Dad had some people who agreed with him early on, but to answer your question, he thoroughly enjoyed seeing his predictions come true.
I'd like to talk about your high school coach, Bill Badgett. Coach Badgett.
Scary.
You've talked of him being a tough man, a hard man, the sort of coach who forced his players through a rite of passage into adulthood. How much of what you have achieved in the sport of football can you attribute to Coach Badgett?
All of it.
All of it, every bit.
Yeah. I didn't like football. I didn't want to be out there. You've obviously read the book. Coach Badgett had that rare capacity to drive us, and yet we all adored him. That's a rarity. To be a really demanding, forceful guy who seldom smiled. If you look at his picture, you can almost feel what he was like. And yet, and he would just demand more than you could possibly give. And for some reason, we just adored him. So we would lay it on the line for him once we learned how. His gift, I think, was to know when to test one's mettle. Because when he sort of took me out there and turned it into a Bill Curry day and made me tackle a great big guy that I didn't think I could tackle, he knew when to do that so that he didn't destroy me. He actually had a sense that I might be able to succeed. And Joe Paterno tells a great story about screwing that up. When you take the guy out too early and he's immature and you embarrass him and he disappears and you never see him again, you haven't done that child a favor. Coach Badgett knew when to do it and how to test a man's mettle. Even if you're a 14-year-old chubby 5'3" little man, he made me do things that I didn't think I could do in tackling and blocking, and the next thing I knew, I was part of the team. I think that's priceless.
You've written a lot about a former teammate of yours and a friend of yours, Bart Starr, but rather than focusing on his achievements on the field, which have been numerous, you've focused always on his friendliness, on the way that he treated teammates and the way he treated the fans and all the people around him. As you yourself have elevated to the high echelons of the sport, has the way that he has treated people around him influenced the way that you treat people?
He leaves you no choice. He's like a big brother. And if you love and admire Bart, and if you played with him, you can't help but admire him. Even if you're just interested in records, he's still the only quarterback in the history of the game to win 5 world championships. They didn't start calling it Super Bowl until after the '66 season. Well, the first 2 of those he won and was MVP. So, I mean, he's just the best ever, and yet he's also the gentlest, kindest, seriously famous athlete I've ever known. I've never seen him turn a child away, ever. I've never seen him turn a punk away. I'm talking rude, drunk, walk up and stuff things in his face. He'll smile, introduce his wife, introduce me, my wife, sign the guy's autograph. I just want to punch the guy out. And Bart's nice to him. And that's how you're supposed to treat people. So I'll find myself, when I'm tempted to be brusque, I'll actually see Bart's face and I'll try to be polite.
One of the lesser-known influences on your life was James Harvey. Compared to these gigantic figures in your life, Vince Lombardi, Don Shula, how much of an influence did this construction worker from Atlanta have on your perspective of society and the world, really?
Eventually, he had every bit as much as any of them. But I didn't know what I was seeing at the time. I just knew I'd been marked. I knew I had seen something magic and courageous. First of all, I couldn't believe that I was expected to work for a black person. It was the racist South. We told racial jokes. We thought they were okay. They were not okay. We thought it was okay for people to live segregated. It was not okay. It was a nightmare. Still is. Racism, sexism, homophobic behavior, all is a nightmare. We didn't get it. We didn't understand. It was 1959. And I show up for work, and the foreman is an African-American guy. We didn't know African-American. There were other words that were used that were just awful. But there he was, and he was big, and he was strong, and he was 33 years old, and I was 16. So you couldn't help liking him. He was likable. He had massive chest and arms, and took care of these two white kids. My buddy Bob Scruggs was also working on this construction site out in Chamblee. And we had a life-changing moment, which is the reason he's in the book. There were a bunch of carpenters out there, good old boys from the country, with their hammers and their long hair and their red man and their pickups and their rebel flags. And there was a water bucket with a ladle. It was the only one where we were doing some framing, and James and Bob and I were carrying the 2x4s and the joists and things for the carpenters. And one of the guys turned to James and said, "Hey boy, get me some water." Well, there was only one person out there that would not have been allowed to use the water bucket, and it was the one he had just called boy. And James just stood there. He didn't move. Never stopped smiling. Big old gold tooth right there. Never stopped smiling. Had those big old arms folded. And the guy said, "Boy, did you hear me? You get me some water." James had a pronounced stutter. He had a speech impediment. He said, "Well, how old do a man have to be before he's not a boy?" All the hammering stopped. The guy stood there and he looked at James. James never stopped smiling. And what he had obviously done is he decided to take a stand, like Rosa Parks, except the risk might have even been greater for him. I don't know. I was just standing there terrified. I didn't know what I was looking at, but I just knew something was going on because everybody was staring now. There was about 8 or 9 other white country guys that were there. And the guy obviously had to decide what he's standing there with a hammer in his hand. James got nothing. Finally, he said, "Okay, James, I'm sorry. I'll get my own water." So we walked out across that old Georgia red clay, and I said, "James, what are we going to do?" By now, I loved him. I knew he was special. "What are we going to do now? Are you in trouble?" He threw his arm around my neck, and he said, "Well, Bill, we just go ahead on. Go ahead on, and don't worry none about it." And he didn't worry, and nobody ever called him boy again in my presence. And like I said, I didn't know quite what I had seen, but I knew it was special. And I'm not sure that I could have responded to Willie Davis, the great captain of the Green Bay Packers, years later, if James had not intervened in my life when I was just a kid.
Wow. On a lighter note, several people throughout your life have turned to you in need of help. Bubba Smith turned to you when he needed help in the courtroom, and you were able to be there for him. Bart Starr, you were the first person he called when he got the head coaching job. He wanted your help up there. And George Plimpton, you know, when he needed the baseball game, he called you up. Why do you think you have been that go-to guy for so many people in your life?
Because I'm a glutton for punishment. Because I'll try anything. I'll even try coaching football at Georgia State University. I enjoy very difficult challenges. I always have. And I don't know if people sort of sense that and then call me because of it. I don't have any special talent. I'm not any smarter than anybody else. I'm certainly not bigger or stronger or any of those things or more talented. But I have a great joy and a great zest in life to try things that are considered impossible by other people and see if we can do it. And a lot of times I get knocked on my rear end, but sometimes we pull things off, and that is so much fun. That's the greatest joy in life, is to do extremely difficult things, especially when you're doing them with other people that you come to know and love in what I call a huddle environment. In football, we happen to call it the huddle, but any sort of community action where we really care about each other and we include every kind of human being. We don't engage in racism or tribalism or sexism or any of that stuff. We just include the people that have earned a right to be there. And then we do these things that are so difficult, and it makes a big difference. It changes people's lives, and it gives all of us a great sense of warmth and love for each other.
Well, one of those challenges you accepted was probably one that you were rhyming to do. The 1972 exhibition baseball game you played against the Atlanta Braves.
That was fun.
You described in your book that catching a strikeout against Rico Carty caused you to lose your mind. How does that experience in the sport that was your first love compare to, say, running out to a sold-out stadium and hearing your name called out with the likes of, Bart Starr or Johnny Unitas?
Wow. Well, it wasn't a strikeout, but it was a strike. It was a swinging strike, and Plimpton was the pitcher, and Rico was one of the best hitters in the National League, great player, and George could actually throw a little bit, and he threw it, it was up and in, and Rico swung and missed. And I lost my mind. I became a bush leaguer, and I shook the ball in his face. And fortunately, he didn't club me with the bat, which is what he probably should have done. I weighed about 250, so it probably crossed his mind that I might not be better. I was embarrassed about it later. But anyhow, the next pitch, he drilled off the right field wall so hard it almost knocked the wall down. So we understood the difference in a major leaguer and the rest of us. It's hard to say what it was like. It was so much fun that it took my breath away just to be out there. To say that it was more fun than actually, I think it was, I can answer it. It was better to run on the field with John Unitas and Bart Starr, because I was actually pretty good at what I was supposed to do. I wasn't a very good baseball player. I had wanted to be, but actually being able to be in the huddle and be a real contributor, and the baseball thing was just an exhibition against the Brave backups.
The title of your first book, or the book you co-authored with George Plimpton, One More July, the title refers to the desire to come back for one more season, to have one more pre-season training. Is your decision to come back to Georgia State and coach football again at this part of your career your desire for one more July?
Yeah, you are really well prepared, young man.
Thank you.
That's exactly what it is. You really surprised me. Here, after all these years, and I've had the privilege of just about everything you can do in our sport, except one thing: I've never started a program, never been a part of starting a program. Nobody does that by themselves, and I don't have that illusion. But to do it in my hometown, at a great university, where my wife earned a master's and a PhD, I've probably driven Carolyn Curry down here 300 times. While we were raising the children, she'd drop the kids at school. And we love Georgia State. And to get to start something that means a lot to an entire community, and especially a community of young people like you and others, that's what I'm supposed to do now, and it is my one more July this time.
Your college coach, Bobby Dodd, was famous for valuing education above anything else.
Yeah, he did.
This now being your fourth coaching position, has his influence affected the way you treat your student athletes?
In every detail. I had been warned by my high school counselor at College Park High, South Fulton County, don't try Georgia Tech, you have no chance. You have frolicked all the way through high school, and she was right, I had. But I went to Georgia Tech because it was the closest school to Agnes Scott. That's where Carolyn Newton was going to be. Now Carolyn Curry for the last 46 years. But I was so immature that I took on this monumental challenge for the wrong reasons. Once I got there, Coach Dodd warned us, you better go to class or you'll be sorry. I didn't believe that. So I cut a class. I ran up and down the west stands until I threw up, until I wept, and decided at some point that chemistry at 8 a.m. was a wonderful thing, and I never cut another class, ever. And that's the only reason I graduated from that brutal place. And I love Georgia Tech with all my heart. I owe Georgia Tech so much. But it was my football coach who loved me too much to allow me to self-destruct when I was too immature to see my own potential. And that's what I get to do for a bunch of student athletes myself, giving them not so subtle messages about what their potential really is.
Now, you've taken on some pretty steep challenges. You tried to follow in Bobby Dodd's footsteps at Georgia Tech. You took on the head coaching job at Alabama, where the national championship is expected every year. You went to Kentucky, where basketball is the big sport, and football is, you have to sort of fight to get people there. How does the challenge of starting a program compare to those previous head coaching positions?
That's another great question. It compares in equal difficulty. You can't really follow Bobby Dodd or Bear Bryant. You can try, but you're not going to do it. You're never going to be that which they are remembered as having been. And that's not very good English, but I think people can understand what I'm saying. Here at Georgia State, as I've told my staff repeatedly, men, we are the Georgia State football tradition. So whatever there is here 40 years from now, it's going to depend in large measure on what happens here the first few years, and we are responsible for that. And accepting responsibility is one of the first primary facets of leadership. So it weighs heavily on me. I think I take this very seriously, and I think it's every bit as difficult and just as important as those other efforts that we made.
I would imagine that recruiting players to a program that doesn't yet exist is very, very difficult. What is it that you're telling these players to entice them to come to Georgia State?
Wait till you see Atlanta GA. And they loved it, and so did their parents. One shocking thing to me was that many of them fell in love with our campus. I thought that would be a complaint. I thought they would say, well, you don't really have a campus, it's not like so-and-so. But people realize we have a contained unit here. We have a lot of students that are here as full-time students who live in the area. That's something new, and our reputation as a commuter school, and of course it is a commuter school. My wife was a commuter student. Her father was a commuter student here. That's where she got her bent toward being a scholar, watching her dad go to night school right down here at Georgia State. It wasn't called Georgia State at that time, but it was this, actually I think it was this building that we're in. I'm pretty sure it was. So all of that I thought would probably be a negative. It's not. There was a real serendipity for me to have the parents and the student athletes say, wow, we really enjoyed the campus and we really enjoyed the kids. And there are a lot of high school students that come here and stay in the dorms now, and we want to come here too. So recruiting here was not as difficult as we thought it was going to be, and I think we probably surprised ourselves a little bit. And I think had we thought about it, if we had really believed that we were going to recruit very well, we would have recruited even better than we did. And I'm going to expect that of our staff next year.
Bubba Smith, who many of our viewers will know better as Hightower from the Police Academy movies, was a former teammate of yours. He introduced you, albeit reluctantly, to a whole new world of workouts, really incorporating hardcore stretching to get the most out of your body. Do his workouts show up in your team workouts?
Yes,
Still?
They do. We stretch. Bubba and I hit it off from the first day. He was a highly touted rookie. He was the #1 draft choice in the NFL that year. I had just been traded over, and I was sort of a down-the-line guy trying to make the Baltimore Colts. And so we sort of hooked up. We had fun teasing with each other, and he started chiding me about being stiff. He said, "You're stiff like the rest of those white guys." And I said, Well, I happened to hate stretching, and so I didn't stretch very well. And I said, what do you mean like the rest? Are you being racist or something? He said, no, you guys could be flexible, but you don't bother to stretch. If you stretch with me, you could be really flexible. And so we went back and forth for a couple of weeks like that, and he finally shamed me into it because he hit me with a race card. He said, you just don't want to confess that a black person might be able to teach you something. I said, oh, baloney, you know better than that. But so he had me, so I had to do it. So we started doing it. Well, he was 6'8", and I'm only 6'2½". So when we sat down and did partner stretch with our legs spread, and he pulled me forward, I mean, it was excruciating. I said, how long is this terrible pain going to last? He said, just a couple of weeks. Well, in time, I became more flexible than I had ever been in my life, and I began to be a better player than I had ever been, and I realized this is a huge factor in being able to, in my case, I had to block. In his case, he had to get off blockers and tackle, but being able to bend your knees and get under people's shoulder pads, being more flexible, has a huge impact on whether you're a good player as a lineman. I just didn't get it until he taught me that. So he taught me a lot of things. He taught me some things I can't even repeat.
You've written at length about the coaching staff that you had at the Baltimore Colts, how it had that great combination of wit, humor, stern demeanor, tactical genius, as well as teaching in a way that made sense for the players. Is this something you've tried to recreate here in the hiring of your assistant coaches?
Yeah. I think it's important to have personality. It's important, of course, to know your sport and know your position and know your job, but just knowledge, especially with today's young people. And in the late 60s, we were sort of the first generation of young people that began to question authority. In fact, we didn't begin to question authority. We had kids taking over administration buildings, and I mean, so we questioned everything. Well, that included the coaches. And people like Lombardi and Shula were the ones that were able to adjust somewhat without giving up their authority. And I think being able to relate to a variety of personalities, to understand different cultures, really got started big time. That was another one of Lombardi's great gifts. He was anti-racist, and he had a lot more African-American players on his team than the other NFL teams, which is one of the reasons his teams won so much. So I think it is important to have a variety of personalities and a way to relate to the young people in something other than just authority versus you're going to pay attention and do what I tell you.
Realistically, it can take years, maybe decades, to build a winning program. What are your expectations here?
Well, you're right. It can take a long time. And I have to confess the way my expectations work. I've been in situations where we could have been predicted to get beat every single week, and we did. I was at Georgia Tech at a time. We were going in the ACC. Georgia Tech was way, way down. There were meetings being held to discuss the dissolution of an athletic department, and we were going into the ACC. Clemson was national champs. We were playing the Georgia Bulldogs. They had been the national champs the year before. We were 2-19-1 over a 2-year span. Our out-of-conference schedule was Alabama, Auburn, Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, Notre Dame. That was our out-of-conference schedule. We were getting hammered every week, but every single week I convinced myself and worked at convincing my players that we should be expected to win. Every week we created a plan, if properly executed, would give us a victory in the game, until finally in the 4th, 5th, 6th years, the victories began to come against some of those very schools that I just mentioned that were beating us to death. So we're going to expect to win the first game, and the second, and the third, and the 8th, and the 23rd, and the 94th, and every time we go on the field, we're going to expect to win.
What are your thoughts about having the Georgia Dome as your home field?
I love it. The guys love it, and the parents love it. We didn't know how that would feel, but there are players who probably signed with us because they're going to get to play in the Georgia Dome. That is not a good reason to select a college, but it sure didn't hurt us. It really helped us in the recruiting. I think they're really excited about it.
one last question. The one thing everyone wants to know. First season, how many wins are you going to get?
Do you expect me to answer that? My answer, if I'm true to what I just said to you in the previous question, if I expect to win every single game, then we'll start the season and our goal will be to win all of them. Now, here's where another bit of Vince Lombardi's genius comes into play. And I really didn't get this until recently. Bart Starr taught it to me. When Lombardi showed up with the Green Bay Packers, they had won like one game the previous 2 years. They were the worst team in pro football. He said, we are going to pursue perfection. Will we ever reach it? Of course not, because we're human. But in the pursuit of perfection, we will capture excellence. That's what we're going to do. So we're going to pursue perfection. Will we reach it? Of course not. But we will capture excellence at some point.
Coach Curry, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Please be sure to check out www.georgiastatesports.com to keep up with the latest developments as we move forward to the first season in 2010. My name is Will Edmonds, and you've been watching Panther Sports.